The investigation into Jeffrey Epstein's New Mexico ranch is on the verge of taking a major step forward. 14 subpoenas are expected as soon as this week. A bipartisan commission in New Mexico has been looking into the property outside of Santa Fe. Epstein bought the ranch in 1993 and visited it several times a year. The state Justice Department there recently reopened a criminal investigation into the ranch after the Justice Department released the Epstein files. They contain documents with new allegations of crimes at the ranch. Epstein was never charged with anything in New Mexico, despite decades-old allegations of sex crimes. Joining me now, NBCNews.com writer John Schuppe. So, John, this bipartisan commission held its first public session yesterday. Walk us through what came out of it and what we're learning about these subpoenas.
Well, this was their first real significant meeting on this topic, and they have a few goals. One is to tell finally the full story of what Epstein did at his ranch in New Mexico. Another is suggest laws to prevent it from happening, anything like this from happening again, and also to suggest, if possible, additional charges against people who may have committed crimes.
So the subpoenas, what could they reveal or tell us?
The subpoenas are, at this point, what they call like foundational evidence. In other words, very broad-reaching, looking for documents from the feds, states, local authorities, as well as a couple of his banks.
Let's talk more about this ranch in New Mexico, because the investigation into the ranch was actually shut down in 2019. Do we know why that was and why it's now reopened?
Well, in 2019, the New Mexico Attorney General's office began looking into crimes, potential crimes at the ranch. And once federal prosecutors in New York got wind of this, they had a call with the state authorities and asked them to stop because they wanted to be able to finish their investigation. The New Mexico authorities stopped out of respect for what they asked for and expected to be able to pick up on their New Mexico investigation, and that never happened. And so this new effort in New Mexico is trying to pick up where they left off a few years ago.
All right, John Schuppe, good to have you with us. I know you'll stay on it. Thanks so much. Thanks. We're following new legal action against an ICE detention center in New Jersey. Protests have escalated at Delaney Hall in recent days after concerns that detainees there are facing inhumane conditions, something the Department of Homeland Security denies. New Jersey's Attorney General filed a lawsuit against the private company that runs the facility, claiming health inspectors were denied access to conduct a full inspection. Newark's mayor said today the city is also suing to close the facility.
When DHS claims that they are working with the city, and I dare to say the state, to protect Delaney Hall and support its operations, it is completely inaccurate. And also deeply offensive to us and to the residents of our city, because our concerns regarding Delaney Hall have only deepened, especially regarding the treatment of detainees, which remain deeply troubling and inhumane.
Joining us now is NBC News senior Homeland Security correspondent Julia Ainsley, who's in Newark. So, Julia, tell us more about the legal action announced today and the response from DHS to these lawsuits.
Yeah, so now two lawsuits, as you laid out there, one coming from the state over access for health inspectors. DHS said that health inspectors from the state of New Jersey were allowed in last week and that they were able to inspect the kitchen area and that they are allowed back in as long as they stay to appropriate places. We're out to the AG's office for a response to that to see if there were any other places they wanted to inspect. Oftentimes, health inspectors need to see where people are sleeping as well. And then the other piece is coming, of course, from the mayor who wants to shut this down. That follows similar calls from Democratic lawmakers on the Hill from New Jersey just last week.
So while this is happening there in New Jersey, Julia, the DHS Secretary Mark Wayne Mullen is addressing concerns over the ICE facility during testimony on Capitol Hill today. What did he have to say?
Yeah, Joe, this is interesting. In fact, they just got into a back and forth just a few minutes ago, specifically about Delaney Hall, the building behind me, where Mark Wayne Mullen told Chris Murphy that the people in here were being treated humanely and that they have completely complied with the state for the inspectors. He cited that health inspectors just came in last week, but Murphy pushed back on that, saying that he needed to know that they were going to at least look into allegations. He cited a letter from 300 detainees saying that the conditions inside were not up to par. The two also sparred about whether or not ICE would be complying with court orders over how they conduct arrests. It seemed that Murphy was pushing Mullen on whether or not he would be complying with court orders that came from judges that Murphy deemed political. In other words, appointed by Democrats, and if he thought that those orders were political, would he then refuse to comply with those orders? And there was some discrepancy about exactly what Murphy considered a constitutional order. So we're going to continue to keep on that. Markwayne Mullin is also going to testify again tomorrow on Capitol Hill, and it's amid the backdrop of protest here.
All right, Julia Ainsley in Newark. Julia, thank you. The North Carolina police officer, the woman, 22-year-old Carson Hyder is charged with assault in connection with the confrontation, which happened last Friday. NBC News is also getting new details about the woman at the center of this video. NBC's George Solis joins us now. So, George, NBC News has learned that Hyder and Sharia Moore do have a history. What more can you tell us about that, and just what's the latest on this confrontation last week?
Yeah, Joe. So looking through some court documents, we did find that there seemed to be a past history between the two in which Sherry Moore did plead guilty to an encounter with this officer. He was the complainant, meaning the person that wrote the report. And then fast forward to just this incident that transpired a week ago, video that went viral. It sparked protests there in the town of Shelby. There was even a city council meeting yesterday where people were demanding justice and accountability. As you mentioned, the officer here, Hyder, he was initially fired. And then he turned himself in on those charges of what at this hour just remains to be a simple assault charge. The family has since retained civil rights attorney Ben Crump, who is, of course, demanding justice and accountability. He's also calling for some upgraded charges in this case. As far as what transpired, it's still not clear what led up to this altercation that, of course, went viral. But what we do know is that Sherry Moore was charged with breaking or entering, resisting arrest, and that assault. Two of those charges were dropped. The breaking or entering one is the only one that remained, and that photo that you're seeing there is what the family released to us, saying this is what she looked like after that altercation. And again, as I mentioned, the family has now retained civil rights attorney Ben Crump, Joe.
All right, George Solis. George, thank you so much. The inner turmoil at CBS News is spilling out into public view, and the renowned news magazine